We can begin working with Cloud. We're going to need a test app. This is a very basic one, pretty minimalistic. We got our account display right here, which is just a label that shows what's going on. We got our buttons. And basically we have these mock elements. When they're updated, it updates the label on the main thread. So we can add or subtract elements from this array. Can't go below 0. So we've got a little safety here. Alright, so pretty straightforward. We've got mock elements, just a string. Very simple. Yeah, and that's it. So that is the test app. Now let's look at getting this guy set up so that we can start using Cloud, because we're not just able to install the framework, we're going to have to actually make this guy have all the proper entitlements and whatnot. So we're going to select our target and we're going to go to capabilities. So that's great features in here. We're going to need these two, and you're going to need a developer's license to use CloudKit. But we're also probably going to want to use background modes. It's not necessarily required, but if you want your app to continue to get remote notifications, you're going to have to turn that on. You just flip these switches over. And when you're doing background modes, you're going to want to turn on background fetch and remote notifications. So that way, if the app's not in the current thing, the database can still be updated. We don't need key value storage here. We use CloudKit. And you notice these check marks, all this is getting handled automatically now. So you don't have to do anything with that. You can specify a custom container. If you use default, one will be provided for you. And this button will take us right into the dashboard. And that's going to take a while. Also here in this info P list, you'll notice sometimes instead of flipping those background modes, people will turn on required background modes here in the P list. If you do that, you're going to want to select these two keys, these two values: app downloads content from the network, etc. Got the containers coming up now. Alright, so you notice there's a bunch of containers. Some are green, some are blue. Basically, green are for production, and blue are for development. We'll talk more about that later. You'll have both of each type, but the green ones have been deployed, which will make sense if you don't already know what that means soon. Make sure that if you have two that are similarly named, you're picking the right one. You want to be in the correct container. Sometimes you log in the wrong container and not realize why. Here you see you got both the green and blue again, development, production. Now production is what your users are actually going to be interacting with once it goes to once you've released the app. But while you're developing, you work in the development environment, and it's a flexible environment. So when you create new record types or new subscription types or add fields to a record or mess with your indices, all that's handled automatically in the development environment. It reacts to your changes in your code when it sees the new fields and updates that. Production's more stable, but it doesn't. It can't make any of those flexible changes. So what you do is you work in development environment, and then once you've got your database schema perfect and the way you want it, you deploy it, and then it'll be in production. And then after that, every time you reset your development environment, it'll clear out all the records schema that's currently in production. So before you go to production, if you hit reset, it'll just wipe everything out, which is what we're going to do right now. So this should bring us back to an initial starting state with nothing in it, and we'll see that here in a second. And we go into the data. That's where you're going to do most of your interacting. And you notice we've got a private database, we've got public database. We're in the records section. There's default zone. We start off with users. Those already exist, but we only have that as a record type. So anything else we need to add, we can add it manually, or the system will detect it once we start trying to submit. And everything we're going to need for our next step, since we got all that set up, we're going to add our pod file now. So we've got great documentation, which you can access here at jlingo.github.io/MagicCloud, or several links. And here, we're basically, these videos are just going right through the README file, and you can copy and paste most of this text. We're going to do a pod file now because that's how we're going to attach MagicCloud. And we're just going to bring up our terminal here, and if CocoaPods isn't already installed, there's links to getting it installed, but as soon as we've got it here, we change to the directory of our actual app, and you can use ls to make sure that you're in the right directory, because okay, you can see, oh okay, these 4 items match up to these 4 items. That's what I was expecting. Now we're going to create the pod file. I use Pico, but it doesn't really matter how you do it. And you can just copy this code right in, and after you paste it, the only part you'll have to change is your target name, because all the rest is set and should work by default. You may have to update the version number, but other than that, I try to keep it up to date with the current version and the docs. Alright, so we've got the pod file created. We put in our target name. Now we can install it by just typing pod install in that directory. And if everything's set up properly and properly installed, it should just download and start loading up our folders full of great classes from the framework. Okay. So we'll check now while that's going on. Notice now we have this workspace. We're no longer going to use the project. If you had it open still, you want to close it. And from now on, only open it with the workspace, because that'll include the pods, which has MagicCloud in it, and any other things you've added already. And you can check in here, and you can actually see that's the classes right there. And the system will keep it all managed for you. And all you have to do is open it up from the workspace. We're waiting for it to finish. And all the code is right here, and now we'll be ready to go into the examples and actually put in lines of code into our test app once this pod file finishes, which it did successfully. So let's open the workspace and let's start adding lines of code. Let's make sure this thing is set up properly. Now that we're back in the app, in the workspace, we got both our test app and pods. This is where anything you've hooked up with CocoaPods will be, and including MagicCloud. Our pod file's right here, so now you can edit in here if you want to like update the version or something. And yeah, this should be full. You should see a bunch of files in here. If you don't see a bunch of files in the MagicCloud folder, something went wrong with your installation. Also, in the test app, when you scroll down, you should see pods hooked up here, not MagicCloud. You'll see pods, because that's how MagicCloud's hooked up, through the pods. Alright, so all that looks good. We should be able to now import and start working with it. If everything is connected correctly, we've got a few things to put in here. We'll do our import statement. And alright, actually my simulator may be taking up too much juice while we're doing this recording, so I'm going to quit that real quick. And the system should, after that, recognize MagicCloud for auto completion, and that's how you'll know everything's okay. If it doesn't recognize that import, then it didn't work. Alright, so we're all set up. Everything worked out well. We're going to now add conformance for the app delegate to MC notification converter. I believe it should, all these MCs in here are the classes we need in the API. Alright, MC notification converter. Alright, that'll add a method we're going to use here in a moment. Here in our did finish launching with options, right, in the application method, we want to put 2 lines of code right here. First, we want to check to make sure that the user's logged into their iCloud account using the MC user record. And then using the application, we're just going to register for remote notifications. That's just built in. If you want more information on how that works, check out the docs for each. Right here, you can see we got all all this. Basically we're just copying and pasting straight from the documentation. And the next thing we're going to need are one of these two methods depending on the version. The third method is what not to do. Yeah, so there's been some confusion about that. Alright, so we're going to need to add a method here that did receive remote notification. So once the remote notification comes in, it's going to get converted by this method, convert to local, which we now have access to because of MC notification converter. That is the only real setup that we have to do to configure the app delegate. That's the main thing, is once we've checked that their account is in, now we need to be able to take this user info and in certain situations convert it to notification center stuff, and all this is documented, so you can check it out over here. But yeah, we'll convert it, and in the background the mirrors are going to use that information to keep everything up to date and to manage it. So you will need that information, but now we've got our app configured. We can start using mirrors and recordables. So recordables are basically the parts of the apps that the classes or types you have, like structs can be a recordable or an enum, but whatever you're adding to the database, the type and its properties will be the fields for the record ID. So we do need CloudKit in this instance. Most of the time you don't need to, but for some of the values in here we're going to need CloudKit. And we're going to need to add a couple of properties to make our mock element conform. Okay, these properties are used in the background by the mirrors to convert your type for you into a proper record and to handle conversion conflicts and stuff like that. So we're going to add a little extension here, which is going to declare the conformance to MC recordable right here. And we've got this computed property, record fields. That's the key one. This is where you use the getter and the setter to transform the properties into key value storage. That will then be basically what matches the record. Record ID has to be unique, and it has to be savable, so that storable, not just a computed property, because the only warning in the whole system documentation is to keep it unique, because the system's going to be using these to do searches and identify it. So if everything you create has the same record name, you're only creating one of them. But yeah, now we're ready to move on to the view controller. Alright, you know what, before we do the view controller, let's go back and make one last change, because that's kind of I'm not leaving with a lot of lines left here. So since we only have one value, we can do it a little differently. Normally, if you have multiple values, you're probably going to want to create a dictionary, load it up key by key. But in this situation, since we only have one value in our simple little mock element, we're just going to pass the straight up one element dictionary. And CK record value will actually work in most cases for you. If not, you can read the documentation about record values and which properties relate to it and how to do it. But most of the time, CK record value works out fine. And boom, now we can set up the view controller. Alright, so here in our view controller, we're going to import again MagicCloud, but we won't need any CloudKit this time. Our data model before this array, we're going to just make that a computed property that connects to a mirror. Okay, the mirror. So instead of this did set, we now have this get and set, and the mirror, you just put in the type, assuming it conforms to recordable. Here is the generics, and you set the database, which should be able to autocomplete. It's an enum that's public, which you can read about in the documentation. There you go, public database, and private DB are the two values you're going to use. And now that mirror will sync that type and that database, and you'll have all of them saved inside the mirror and can access it. We moved the dispatch queue over. We need to update still the counter, but since we're not going to do that in the setter, we need to know if in the background the mirror has updated. So the mirror has a change notification that it's going to let us know, and we're going to put that in a new view_did_load method. And boom, so now the counter will be updated whenever that notification occurs. So that'll occur, okay, let's give it self, sorry. That'll occur every time change notification gets sounded, and change notification will get sounded every time the recordables, the values that's stored in the mirror, get adjusted or changed. Okay, so we finished all the implementation now. We got the simulator mysteriously back up and running, and it's time to build. And we're going to build it for a 5S, since that'll be a little bit easier on my system, which is also recording right now. Okay, so this building is going to take a while. We're going to fast forward through this. It built so fast, though. Alright, so now that this building is done, we're going to go in the dashboard, and we're going to see if the changes we make here in the dashboard and the changes we make in the app, if they mirror each other as they're supposed to now. Okay, still building. Oh, joy. Well, that's okay, because we can fast forward this a little bit more. Build succeeded. Launching. Test app. Yay. Alright, so this white screen is loading. And what should happen is we should actually get some errors. And the system normally would be subscribing to the remote notifications and then downloading whatever was currently in the database. Currently there's nothing in the database. But because we're inserting the mock element records for the first time you use the new element, it gets saved, but we're going to get these little errors here down at the bottom of the console, you should see. So we can add, and it's going a little slower than it would like to because we need to update the indexes in the database. But let's go check here. Okay, well, it doesn't look like anything's changed, and that's because we need to refresh the screen. And we'll get that error. Let's refresh, since now we have some new record types to deal with. And when it loads so quickly, we should see the new mock elements in the record fields. Right? And it always takes you back to private, so make sure you move to public database. So we're in the records. We've got mock elements now. And we still can't query because we need to add the record name. So it already has some of this metadata by default, but we're going to add record names, and all we have to do is click add index and save, because it automatically gives you record name first, because I can't imagine why you wouldn't want record names to always be queryable. But boom, now we can find it. And so if I make an addition, query, boom, these mock elements are getting stored in the system. Now when I delete, it should update and mirror, but oh no, what's going on? That's right, folks. It's not mirroring. There's some kind of a problem here. Okay, well, let's see. Let's look at, let's stop this, and let's look at this error code thing down here. And there's no real way to draw attention to it in the screenshot video, but basically, you see we're getting all these errors because the mock elements record ID hadn't been indexed properly. And anytime you get an error, it'll be reported here on the console. You also get a notification, as I said. You hear that in the documentation. But now that we've got our index, we should be able to load it. The subscription should trigger. Everything should work fine. And we should automatically download the mock elements that are currently in the database. So once this white screen, loading screen finishes, boom, automatically loaded that one element. So now when I create new, if I create new, save, or modify, it should make an update. Except it didn't seem to work still. Alright, I didn't get errors this time. Why isn't it working? If I save or if I delete, it should update. Well, the reason why it's still not updating is because we're working with a simulator. So simulator's never going to work right with the remote notification system. So if you want to test that part of it, you're going to have to use a real iPhone. Alright, so now I've got my phone plugged directly in. you should see. Okay, so now we've got it up and running on separate app. You can see that it's synced up. There's 0 mock elements in the database, 0 on the phone, and it's plugged in, so we'll see console messages here. And I've created one. Oh, boop, got added. Queried, and he's there. Let's create another one. And yes, we got 2 of them. Now, if you don't have the record names distinguished properly, deletions will become a problem, which we would encounter right here, but we've got unique record names, so we should be able to just delete, and wow, the system recognizes it. So boom. You're getting some warnings in the background. That's just saying that the completion block, if you just read it, it's pretty apparent the completion handler isn't being run at the end of that, which we can do. But boom, it's working.